That's the shot.
Okay. And bring it a bit closer towards you. A bit closer, yeah, that's it.
I think I'm going to drink from it.
No, don't drink it.
George Patterson is one of the very few in early days, 1950s and early 59s, who were talking about Tibet, who really in depth gave information to the world. And nowadays, of course, you have so many people who can write about Tibet, who have visited Tibet. But those days, in 1950s and 59, and there were hardly anybody. George Patterson is one of the very first Western people who gave so much information about Tibetans and their resistance. And so I was very pleased he was given this award. As a refugee, I think we knew very little about what the world thinks about us, and even we did not know much about the world. So by the time I was able to read a little bit English, and I tried to read what other people talk about Tibet, what other people knew about Tibet. So I came across the George Patterson's book. So I was very interested to read his book. I think he wrote 6, 7 books, which most of them I read. And then later on, I came to meet George Patterson. And one thing which I remember now is that I was very impressed that the other people, not the Tibetans, other people, Western people, also took great interest in Tibet. And especially George Patterson, how he first went to China as a missionary to convert people into Christianity. Afterwards, he himself was converted into Tibetan and became a Tibetan, more Tibetan than even the Tibetans. And he wrote much about their background, their history, and he was very impressed by the Tibetan culture, especially culture of the Kham area. And so he became very close friend of many people, quite famous people, especially Pomda Raga and other people. And he was also very impressed by the local Tibetans thinking of making some kind of independence of themselves without depending so much on other people. And I was, at that age, I was quite impressed that actually there were some Tibetans who were conscious of their future and that they need to rule themselves instead of depend on other people ruling over them. So that impressed me quite a lot. Second thing which impressed me very much was that West people appreciated our culture so much. Our culture is our culture, so we just get used to him. But also he's somebody, Western people, not imposing their feeling and views on Tibetans, but actually he took a great interest to learn their thinking, their vision, their culture, and their values. And after studying all those things, then he began to appreciate these people. Looks very simple, but they have a really depth knowledge and vision for their future and everything. And that's what that impressed him very much. And for me as a Tibetan, someone, Western people who is not imposing, but learning the culture and their views and thinking, and then appreciate that, I thought is something quite special. You know, many people, they may be expert, but they try to impose their views on other people. But George Patterson is complete opposite. He first spent lots of time and energy to learn their culture, their views, their thinkings. Then he tried to reflect those things. I think that is something quite special with George. When I became a representative of His Holiness in London, I actually met him again, and then in fact I introduced him to His Holiness, and George had a wonderful meeting with His Holiness, and they joked, and His Holiness said, "You are still Khampa," and touched his bear, and that was really very good occasion for George as well as His Holiness enjoyed, I think, meeting him.
A very highly prestigious award being made to one of our residents, George Patterson. It is the Light of Truth Award, and it is only given to I think I also realize that this award has been given in many more exotic and lovely surroundings than Auckland, although we wouldn't think so. But the award's been given in luxurious hotels all over the world, and here we are in Auckland. What shall I say? A group of old folk in an old people's home. Here we are. We feel really privileged to have this award being given here to George. George was and is a remarkable man, and one who has held firmly to his faith in God over many, many years. It is this same God who has brought him through sadness and joy, difficulties and dangers, and we can read all about those. And he's brought him to this point today in his 91st year. I just want to say, on your behalf, bless you, George. Bless you, George. And we are honored to share this award with you today. I would now like to hand over to our friends from the International Campaign for Tibet, and the person who is going to introduce to us is the president of that organization. She's from the USA, and her name is Mary Beth, and I would love to hand over to her now.
It is such a privilege to be here. My heart is full of joy, and although we may have given this award at more fancy locations, I don't think any of them are more prestigious than this one. And I'm thrilled to be with all of you, especially you, George. Thank you very much. I wish I had an opportunity to spend time with each of you and hear your own stories. I know that in a group this large, there must be some doozies. But we're here to celebrate one, and that's Mr. George Patterson. In 1946, George Patterson arrived on the eastern border of Tibet. From that time in Tibet until now, George has lived fixed in his belief that a transcendent morality should and can guide relations among peoples. His love of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and his love of the Tibetan people has made Mr. Patterson a passionate advocate for Tibet on the international stage. He is most widely known among Tibet activists for his fantastic documentary, Raid into Tibet, a record of a 1964 raid by Khampa guerrillas against a Chinese convoy across the Nepalese border in Tibet. The Light of Truth Award that is presented by the International Campaign for Tibet is given to those who have made a significant contribution to the public understanding of Tibet and the fight for human rights and freedoms for the Tibetan people. For his film and his mission to serve the just cause of Tibet, the International Campaign for Tibet presents Mr. George Patterson with its 2011 Light of Truth Award. Congratulations, George. I would now like to respectfully request that Mr. Thubten Samdup, the representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Northern Europe, present the Light of Truth Award to Mr. George Patterson.
Well, it's wonderful to be here, and also to honor a man. I must confess that I have not read any of Mr. Patterson's books, but I've heard his name, and for me it's a privilege to be here representing His Holiness to present this award to Mr. Patterson. And it is my pleasure to convey to you, Mr. Patterson, that His Holiness the Dalai Lama sends his warm regards on this occasion.
Thank you very much.
And again, thank you all for being here, and it was a pleasure. It's a wonderful day. I mean, it's very auspicious, and I hope that one day, very soon, that His Holiness will be able to return home, and the Tibetans will have its rightful place. We've been in exile for too long. And thank you very much, and pray for us.
Beth, Markey, and all the good friends of our Lord. Thank you very much for coming in. Marvelously sharing this day with me. I was as surprised as anyone to receive this award, because I hadn't really expected. I knew about it as part of the history of Tibet, but I never knew that I would reach its very glamorous heights, because I never thought I had considered doing enough. And some of you say, well, what did you do? If you haven't read the books that have been mentioned. Well, I can't take the time, much as I'd like to record it all, but I was very glad to be accepted as a friend of the tribes in Tibet known as Khampas in the east and west. And in fact, after a time, a short time, I was even more glad when they called me the Khampa Gyau, or the bearded Khampa. And the name, if not handed down to posterity, will be carried on for a bit, because my granddaughter on my right has got a tattoo on her ankle with the name on it. I had been working amongst the Khampas for 3 years. I was running out of medicines when the Chinese reached the borders of Tibet. And a decision had to be made then as to whether I could carry on doing the medical aspect of the work that I was involved in. It had grown extensively in the 3 years, and I was running out of medicines, which most of the time, up until then, I had received from China. But with the Chinese army gathering on the borders, I could no longer get supplies, and so I was running out of supplies. So I decided that I would attempt to get to India for medical supplies. It meant, of course, that I would have to travel over the worst terrain in the world at the worst time of the year, in midwinter, and without a map or anything, get across 1,000 miles of the mountainous, 15,000 mountainous range of mountains that circle Tibet, the Himalayas and Karakoram and Minya-Konka ranges of mountains. I had also to get there, get to India, and get back in 3 months, because I didn't have the time for one reason or another, to take the 6 months that it normally took the caravaneers to go. There's also at that time of the year the Siberian winds, and then the snows and the intense cold, where during the night you hear the trees splitting and the rocks splitting as they change from the daytime heat into the nighttime cold. And so it has that kind of effect on a person as well, and I had to become used to sleeping either with the horses or with the yaks. I much prefer the horses. When the chiefs of the area sent for me and asked if I would go and represent the people when I reached India, represent the Khampa people who were going to be fighting. They didn't have enough arms or ammunition, they said, but would I try and find arms and ammunition to supply an official representation in the influential bodies of the other countries. I was stunned because I had never anticipated this at all, but when I had gone to Tibet, it was to find out really what God wanted me to do and to have a personal relationship with God in this world. And it turned out at that time the 1900s. And so finally Jeff and I, prayed about it, my companion, decided that I should go and make the attempt. And so I travelled over 2.5 months, the worst terrain in the world. Difficult to remember now, although I wrote a book about it. And arrived in India in 2.5 months. I didn't know where to go or how to go about doing anything that I had been asked to do, but I managed to get the medicines and get them in caravans and send them back. And then I tried to find out the officials. I knocked on the door of the British High Commission and said, I'd like to speak to someone about Tibet. And it was total bemusement. They didn't even know where Tibet was. And so after about 2 hours, when I was asked to come in and sit down and was looked at by various officials and then went away, I was invited to go into the First Secretary and meet him and discuss the situation. It was very interesting. He took notes for about 2 hours, said he would look into the matter, and he would get back to me. Meanwhile, would I like to come to dinner tonight? And so I went to dinner and I found that there was an official from the Indian government, an official from the American government, and one from the British government, of course. And all of them, of course, were intelligence people, not just intelligent, but the intelligence or from the spying, to put it crudely. They took an intense number of notes, but then a few weeks came back to me and said that, sorry, that Britain, the British High Commission, did not believe my story, and that in any case the Chinese were too busy in Korea and could not do anything to help Tibet. So I made preparations to go back to Tibet, and for one reason or another, a monsoon, an 8.9 earthquake, we've seen it quite dozen in Japan. This happened in Tibet. And I forgot the name of the term that struck my leg, but anyway, put me in hospital for 2 months. So I was unable to return to Tibet before the Chinese actually attacked, and then there was panic. There was also constant demand for my services from the various officials, none of whom spoke Tibetan, whereas I had fluent Tibetan. And so I became the conduit for conversations at the highest level between the governments of Britain America, and India. Unfortunately, the things that I said are required for the tribes, the Khampa tribes that I had got amongst, were not acceptable to the authorities, and I made preparation to go back to Tibet. Instead of which, again, I met an obstacle in the person of Dr. Tibet Patterson. And so I got married, which meant a whole lot of other considerations. Meanwhile, the situation in Tibet had increased and of course became an item of great danger to the safety and security of the nations in Asia, especially India and China. And from their policies, they prepared to sacrifice the country of Tibet in their own national interests, supported by Britain, America, and the United Nations. Again, I was asked by the leaders of the Tibetans if I would help them. I was George Patterson from a little village, Lorson, in Scotland. I left school when I was just approaching 14 without any certificate, and now I was asked to negotiate between countries at the highest level. Not only that, but within a year, the Dalai Lama arrived on the borders of India, the Tibetan borders of India. The Tibetan refugees had gathered in the town of Kalimpong in the Himalayas, and the Dalai Lama's mother had a house just a few hundred yards from me, and I had become neighbourly friendly with her and the family, and I was invited one day to come and have tea. So I went suspecting nothing, and at the tea I was asked about meeting the Dalai Lama's older brother. The older brother had just escaped from the Chinese communists, not only in his monastery in Tibet, but also in the capital, Lhasa. The Chinese authorities had groomed him to take over from the Dalai Lama, instead of which he had come secretly to India and had just arrived with his mother in the border town of Kalimpong. When he asked about coming to see me, I didn't suspect anything because that was polite Tibetan custom. And I said anytime, but I was surprised when a couple of hours after I had been visiting him at his mother's, he turned up on my doorstep with 4 large priests as bodyguards. And after drawing curtains and sitting down, he said he had something secret to tell me. He drew 2 letters from his pocket and handed one to me and said, if you read that, you'll find out my purpose in coming to you. The letter was from the Dalai Lama to the President of America, saying that, asking for assistance for his older brother to come secretly to America. The second letter was from the Dalai Lama himself to the President of America, General Eisenhower at that time, saying that the Dalai Lama wished to come secretly to America. And the request from the brother was that I negotiate getting him both to America. I managed to get the Dalai Lama's brother away, but with some difficulty, because at the time that he was ready to fly away from Kolkata to America, the Chinese delegation, or the delegation that the Dalai Lama had sent from Tibet to China to make an agreement, had arrived in Calcutta and returned as well, led by the Dalai Lama's brother-in-law. And he brought startling news. He reported to me, as his brother-in-law, that the Chinese had prepared a forgery and had stamped the agreement that the claim had been made freely by the Tibetans with this seal, this forged seal. And so there was no agreement between either Tibet or China. Well, that was bad enough, but then the next day I managed to get the Dalai Lama's brother secretly away in a plane from Calcutta to America. When he arrived in America, naturally, he had to make a statement to the press, and the statement to the press was that his brother might soon be in America. So that roused the nations of China, India, and the Far East, and then the United Nations as well. It also placed me in a very difficult position, because the Chinese sent out word I was to be killed immediately. And the Indian authorities came and asked if I would like a bodyguard and would like a permission to carry a gun. So I said, well, no, I don't do these kind of things. I'm here to preach, not to shoot anyone. But anyway, the Dalai Lama didn't get away. In the situation that existed at that time, he was ready to come away from Tibet. But in the border town where he was, there were three abbots of the three largest monasteries of Tibet. And that they insisted that he consult the oracle, which is a Tibetan practice officially. And so when he consulted the oracle under transposition, said that he had to return back to Lhasa and not go to America. He insisted on a second trial with the oracle, and again the oracle under possession said he must return to Lhasa. And so he regretted he was unable to take advantage of the facilities that I had provided and that the Americans had extended, but he could not do anything but other than return to Lhasa. And so that was 1951. He returned to Lhasa, and the fighting between the Tibetans and the Chinese, in the revolution sense, broke out in 1956 among the tribes in East Tibet, and then spread all over. And from 56 to 59, we had the sight of the Tibetans desperately trying to fight and get rid of the Chinese inside Tibet, but running out of arms. It meant then that the hopes of the Tibetans were dashed and nothing could be done about it. The Dalai Lama escaped and made a decision that he would come into India, which in my view was a mistake, because it meant then that the Indians would control his movements as they have done for the last 15 years. It made it very difficult to be allowed for the Dalai Lama to talk on religious subjects, but not political. That he raised it by the ire of the Indian government, and they took strong exception to my articles that I was writing on behalf of Tibet, until it became a matter for the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister of India, Pandit Nehru, the very popular Pandit Nehru, he announced in Parliament that they were expelling Mr. Patterson who persisted in his articles to publish bizarre rumours as fact. And he declared there is no violence in Tibet. What is taking place is a clash of wills and not of arms. We take great exception to Mr. Patterson writing as he does. And so I was under order of expulsion from India. Unfortunately for Mr. Nehru, a day or two later, the Dalai Lama fled from Lhasa towards India and arrived on India's borders and created a crisis, state of crisis between India and China. At that point, I asked to see Mr. Nehru. I was told by British authorities and Indian authorities that there was no way Mr. Nehru was going to see me. But I insisted, but they persisted in refusing to forward any letters. So I wrote a letter. I gave it to a soldier at the gate of the Prime Minister's house. I gave him a very large bribe. And the next morning I had a reply from Pandit Nehru saying he would meet me at 11 o'clock that morning. I had a very enlightening discussion with the Prime Minister of India, who insisted that he was committed to friendship with China and could not do anything to help Tibet. Unfortunately, we clashed at that and couldn't come to an agreement. I said there would be war between India and China before a year or two. In fact, it took 3 years from that time, from 1959 to 1962, because in 1962, war broke out between India and China, the infamous border war. At that time, I decided that I could do no more than the borders of Tibet, but that I would be free to help where and when I could. So I have devoted what remained of my life after that. I would be about in 1961. I was 41. And then since then I have traveled to Tibet 2 or 3 times as we heard, to make annoying films about the Chinese inside Tibet and arguing that they should have freedom to pursue their own affairs. And so it has pleased me a great deal, been very fulfilling personally and professionally, to do the things that I felt that God called upon me to do, because in all of the situations in which I was placed, I made it very clear to both friends and family that I spent time in prayer in order to find out what it was that God wanted me to do in the circumstances. To me, I have had 70 years of very enlightening walk with God, and all of it has been tied, in a sense, to Tibet. So everything I really owe spiritually, as well as professionally, is the country of Tibet. So I am glad to be able to accept the award from Tibetan officials and friends, this award today. Thank you very much. Well, I'd only say it's been a fascinating afternoon or so, and especially to hear George tell us of his adventures. I warn you, it reads like fiction. Can you imagine George on horseback in the Tibetan plateau, winning a race against native Tibetans? It happened, and it's just wonderful that we can hear of these things. I'm sure you'd like me to wish George every blessing and congratulations on this beautiful little award. The meeting is going to close now, but please don't rush away. We'd like you to see this lovely thing, which I think is a lamp, is it not?
Yes.
A butter lamp, which is very often used in Tibet, in fact all the time. Do come and see it, it's quite beautiful. I would like to thank on your behalf the delegation who came, travelled a long way to be with us, and the family members, and indeed to you all for coming this afternoon.
A wonderful, clear explanation of where you were at this one key moment in history that you gave this afternoon.
I felt like going on with them, but I thought I better limit myself in time-wise. The one was enough.
Well, we could have listened to you for a much longer time.
Oh, thank you. Even at that, I overran the time.
Oh no,
but
you
as
didn't.
Chairman said, you know, I have a reputation for doing that.
And I believe that you've been involved in another book more recently about Tibet. When was your last book, and can you tell us about it?
The idea came from doing an interview with Sam at the death of Tibet. You know, at the connivance of all the nations, you know, around about at the price of Tibet. As I see it, that there's no way out. The nations are prepared to connive with the United Nations in the suppression of what's happening in Tibet, you know, and don't know any explanation for it, but well, I do know an explanation for it, and that is a big power of politics, you know, and China and India. That the Prime Ministers of India have inherited Prime Minister Nehru's vision, and that was that he saw the future being with China and India. That if they did it, if they combined together, that they would form what he called the third stool of world politics. The Soviet group, the Western group, America, Britain and Europe, and China and India, a third side. So that, for the realization of that vision, he was prepared to, it needed the sacrifice of Tibet. So that's big power politics for you.
And at the same time, more recently, we've seen the triumph of people power in places like Egypt over authoritarian nations, and also inside Tibet and in exile. We've seen the Tibetans building a robust democracy, and we've seen Tibetans keeping the spirit of Tibet alive too. And do you feel that there is some hope in those things?
At this stage, I don't feel hope. My reason is that the Tibetans haven't discovered this question of intimidation. No, they're prepared to fight for their freedom, but that isn't enough inside Tibet. You know, that, you've got to be able to embarrass the big powers, and until they are prepared to do that, you know, embarrass the big powers. That's why I was so angry at the Dalai Lama coming to India. If he had stayed inside Tibet, he would have had a tremendous lever for the sympathy of the world, and he would continually have embarrassed China and India into getting Tibet its freedom, or at least give a chance of it. But once they came into India and accepted the terms of no politics, you know, not speaking politics, it's dead, you know, and it's still dead, you know, there's no way. The youngsters, the nearest they came to it was when you had the youngsters parading and starving themselves, you know,
the hunger strikes, and then in
New Delhi.
2008.
Yeah.
Right.
The Dalai Lama himself came and pled with them not to do it, you know, and because they recognised him, they gave it up. But they had to go on and maybe even die. And that's it, the thing, that this whole thing started with the fellow, an obscure person who died in Egypt, you know, the first uprising. It only needed one person to die. And so you need to have one person to die in a situation to evoke the response of others to follow and to support you. You've got to get one person to die in it. And too bad.
And from your history and your stories, and I'm just wondering, because when we showed you the photograph this afternoon of Hermanta and Adrian and Lodi Gyari, and that clearly brought back a lot of memories of that particular time. And was there any moment this afternoon that you particularly carried with you, any sort of special moment that you can tell us about?
Yeah, well, that itself was a special moment, you know, with Adrian and Hermanta. Doing that film was outrageous, you know, at that time. I mean, in every way, I left my wife with £200, you know, and Adrian was the same. The three of us, we put our money into it because we couldn't get any backing. You know, for it. So it was a question of doing it. We were actually, or I was requested by two of the top Tibetan officials, the ones who had taken part in the original revolt discussions in Kham in 1954, when Dalai Lama was coming back from Delhi. He met with Khampa leaders. Two of these leaders came to see me in London at that time and asked about doing something else. So please do something. So the only way I could do it was to get Adrian agreed to go, and he knew this great cameraman, Chris Menges, and then they insisted that I go as well. I was going to get them to go. I said, well, I'm married now, I've got a child, and my days for that past. In any case, I don't think it'll do any good. But we finished it, and it had this worldwide acceptance, but it never did any good. You know, what use is 200 million people applauding you, you know, if it doesn't turn a wheel, you know. So that was my feeling that, okay, that nothing really can be done unless you get a Tibetan to die for the cause. If it died for the cause, then you're up and running, you know, you can do something again. But I'm 90.
But you received the Light of Truth Award as a symbolic representation of shedding light onto the struggle, and that film is a prime example of the way you told Tibetan stories and brought attention to that to the world.
Yeah, I think we did on that at that level, but I say at the revolutionary level, it didn't accomplish what we had hoped it would. You know, at a professional level, I think it was there weren't enough people killed, and the one person who died, the Tibetan who died, didn't die. You know, he was buried. I mean, I wasn't there when they buried him, but his two friends buried him under a pile of stones. And yet, you know, next day, 24 hours later, he follows us. He comes over the mountains, you know, to survive.
And this is one of the most amazing stories in your book, because he was shot, wasn't he?
He was
shot.
And
then everyone thought he was dead, and then he made it back to the camp.
Yeah.
And you thought he was a ghost at first, returned from the dead.
Yeah.
But then you were able to treat him, to provide medical treatment.
Yeah. He didn't need to come down to the hospitals in Kathmandu, and I was able to do enough for him there. But again, you see, it would have had that element of tragedy, you know, to do something more. You know, we must do something as poor man, instead of which they wanted to cut it out of the film because nobody would believe it. You know,
Wow.
you know, the big shots in BBC. We can't put that in because nobody will believe this, that it actually happened. If you say he was buried as if he was dead, and he left it. So yeah, that's Tibet's tragedy, as far as I feel it.
About the first dialogue.
Oh, okay, yes. Yeah, just again to sort of think back to your travels to Hong Kong many years ago, and your connection to the dialogue that began with Tibetan exiles and with the Chinese government. I wonder if you could perhaps clarify how you were involved in that.
I had this mysterious, well, it's not the friend I had that was the Chinese, the Indian journalist, and he invited me to a meal of which there was no suspicion. But when I went to him, he said that he said 2 Chinese wanted to meet me. So I said, what for? And he said, I didn't know. So I said, all right. So I met 2 Chinese in his flat. And to my astonishment, they said that they wanted to initiate a dialogue between the Dalai Lama and the Chinese. You know. And I said, but what authority do you have, you know, to speak for the Chinese? So they showed me their authority. They were who they said they were. So I said, all right, I'll see what can be done. So then I spoke to, who did I speak to? I can't remember anyway. I went to India and up to Dharamsala, and in the course of it, I met several Tibetans, including Kundaling, and Kundaling said that he would take it up, you know, with the Dalai Lama's representatives, and I said, but I need to know what it's all about. You know, is Dalai Lama genuine? Is the Tibetan government genuine? Before I go back and tell the Chinese. So he came back and said yes, and he had been appointed, if the Chinese was a sincere, immediate journalist, and he contacted the Chinese and said that it was genuine. And Kundaling Gudcho came to Hong Kong, and I delivered them to a hotel, to a hotel and restaurant in Hong Kong, and left them to their discussions. I wasn't invited to the discussion, but I left them for that. So, but again, nothing came of it, and I said that, you know, my interpretation was that the Chinese were playing games. And that there was nothing serious in the development.
If His Holiness was here today, as you know, he's been working in exile tirelessly for his people. And I just wondered, given your historical experience over the last 50 years, 50, 60 years, longer, then what would you say to him if he was sitting here today, to His Holiness?
You know, I suspect he might be contemplating doing what I've just said, but dying for the sake of the people, that he has withdrawn, you know, he's saying he's withdrawing. And that is good Tibetan practice, you know, when you're elderly, yeah, you prepare for the next stage of your existence. Okay, so as the Dalai Lama, he is a stage lower than the Panchen Lama. Panchen Lama doesn't soil his hands with helping the poor and the dispossessed. The Dalai Lama, in doing so, doesn't jeopardize his entrance into nirvana. But he postpones it as long as he's dealing with people and their problems and so on. So, I mean, that's both his greatness, but also his weakness, because his insistence on non-violence means it can never be successful. As I said earlier, unless you die and prepare to die for it, you can never be successful. If you die, then you can do what they do in Egypt or anything else. You know, that is the necessary process. So I suspect that having tried several things for 20 years, that he might be thinking that that is a move that his death would stimulate a whole lot of protests amongst the Tibetans, as you know. But I think maybe as he's thinking that in his death, he might be able to precipitate the revolution that will help Tibet, without him being participating in violence itself. You know, because ironically, the death for a cause is not a perversion. You know, death for a cause is admired. You know, it's an admiration. It's the ultimate sacrifice of the individual for the cause. That is there. I know. I've been there. So I think that there may be a slight gleam of light for Tibet with his withdrawal from the position of the Dalai Lama, even though there's a lot of objection to it. But it's in the obscure realm of religion.
Okay, so we should close. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
George. It's been really a privilege and an honour to be here.
It's lovely. You too. Thank you for all the trouble you've gone to. I didn't know I was going to be so wonderful when I started talking with you. Who are you, Kate Saunders?
That's right.